Hello, Jeff.
Yeah.
Hello, so sorry we're having technical difficulties. But we will be starting in just a couple of minutes. All right, this is Carlin Sloan, and for those of you who are just being admitted now, we've been having some technical difficulties, but we're excited to welcome you to this webinar. The wonderful Michael Papanek is an expert in resilience and decision-making, organization development. I'm going to let him introduce himself in just a minute, but while we get everybody online and ready, we just wanted to give you a little muting you all, just so that we can get this right for you, and we'll unmute you as we participate, and really look forward to the interactivity that we'll have on this particular webinar. So Michael is just loading his slides right now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. And sorry again for our technical issues. Good to see you. I think I can kind of launch us here now.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. And hello, everybody. Welcome. And again, sorry we're a little late. We will dive right in. So decision making, always a difficulty. Right now, especially interesting, I think. So I'll be interested to hear, and we're going to try to keep this pretty interactive. And we'll certainly end on time, even if we start a little late. So what are we going to talk about today? We want to have an interactive dialogue about these different types of questions. So given decision-making is always an important part of leadership, how can we be effective at it, and how can we deal with some of the special challenges that we're experiencing? But they certainly feel special right now. So we're going to dive in a little bit to how the different types of bias particularly influence how we make decisions, and why it's difficult to influence others sometimes, even when we seem to have shared goals generally. We'll talk about some tools and strategies for then overcoming those challenges, how to deal with your own bias, how to deal with the bias of others so you can make those decisions. And we'll provide some frameworks that allow you to be both collaborative and decisive, which is really what we're kind of the sweet spot that we're after. So hopefully that's why you're here. Let's see, advance, there we go. Who am I? An older version of the young guy in the photo. I know you're muted, but you're all laughing right now, I can tell. And I wrote a book previously in 2017, wrote a book called From Breakdown to Breakthrough, 4 Resilient Business Relationships in the Heat of Change. I've been an organizational development consultant, a coach, a trainer, and a facilitator since 1992, mostly here in the Bay Area. And so a lot of these ideas are either ideas from this book or obviously ideas from my research. So enough about me and my book. So I would ask everybody to be unmuted. So if my fellow hosts can unmute the group. And I'd certainly be interested in video too, if that's possible. So are we unmuting, folks?
I am unmuting right now. Sending that request.
Merci beaucoup. All right, very good. So when you think about decision making, what is especially making it difficult to make good decisions right now, either for you as an individual facing a lot of decisions that you're dealing with, or as a team? So what are some of the challenges that you're facing? And I think we really just go to anybody, again, as long as we're all unmuted.
Actually, at this point, you'll need to unmute yourself if you'd like to be heard.
Right, I think maybe, okay. Is that how it works?
Yep, we're unmuted.
There we go.
So did anyone You know, I'm wondering if the muting here is working or not working.
Yeah. No, it's definitely. No, it's definitely not gonna issue. Well.
All right, here's what I'm going to.
Actually, and I think Angelina is trying to talk, so let's let Angelina talk.
See?
No, I'm not trying to talk. I don't have anything to say.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to make it a little different suggestion. Why don't we, if people want to share, let's just do a little brainstorming in chat. So if everybody would just share, what is one answer to the question here? What makes it hard to make good decisions? And what challenges are you facing? So if you can open your chat window, you can put your answers here. So much uncertainty. Hi, Beth. Good to see you. Pressures from different sides and stakeholders, right? What else are people experiencing? Having facts is a challenge. Yes. Risk is a challenge. So yes, the decision-making is almost like a fraction. The above part of the numerator is the challenge, or excuse me, is the decision-making we do. The denominator is the risk. And so we have to do better decision-making the bigger the bottom risk is. Concern about job security. That's right, making decisions in that context. Constantly changing variables. Thank you, Beth. Trying to do more with fewer resources. Yeah. And what do they say? New challenges cause us to learn new capabilities. Well, we are definitely in that environment. Lack of experience in adverse conditions. Thanks, David. Yeah, so learning something new, you know, can be fun or hard, but learning everything new at once is definitely hard. Any other challenges that people would want to share in chat? All right, great. I'm gonna, you know, kind of keep us moving along here. Clients aren't grounded. Yeah, that's right. So the shifting, you know, how secure we are, it definitely affects our ability to make decisions. Embedded bias that are now major derailers. So David, we're gonna want to come back to that in a moment because we're going to talk about bias. So I'd be curious, as I go through some of these bias issues, you might think about what are you experiencing or what are you seeing is happening to other people. So there's always room in chat for some more ideas. So thank you for that. And I'm going to kind of move us on here. So what we have here, and again, some of you may or may not be aware of, there is an actual online training workshop on decision making that you can take, and it's part of the self-paced learning that's in the new Inspiring Leadership application. You should be able to unmute yourselves. Well, I'd certainly love to hear your voices next time. So I'm going to sort of talk for a moment, and then maybe we can unmute and for the next discussion. So anyway, these are from that program. Yes, inspiringleadership.io for the workshop reference. So just telling you some great videos and other information there. So that's where a lot of this comes from. And of course, there's research beneath that where it really comes from. So we're going to go through 12 different types of bias. I'm going to do them pretty quickly in terms of a little mini lecturette. And then, like I said, what are you observing in the world, you know, in the larger world, but also in your own world of these biases, and especially in yourself. So I think these are mostly alphabetical. I'm noticing is probably how they're sorted. Anchoring bias. So the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information that you learn. So probably the classic example of this is somebody tells you, oh, I gotta get a little better with my mouse here. Somebody says to you, well, I'd like to put my house on the market, right? So many of us have had to buy or sell a house, and what you price the house at, most realtors use a strategy based on anchoring bias. They know that if you see a house, the first price you see for that house is going to influence your decision making. And so if you see a house, I'm just going to make it up, here in California, you know, the numbers are crazy. But let's say you have a $1 million, a house that you want to sell for $1 million. If somebody sees that house at 900,000 and bids it to $1 million, they think they've got a great deal. If they see it at $1 million and they just buy it for $1 million, they might go, well, I didn't get such a great deal. If somebody tells you you can have a great, you know, experience at a hotel for $200, if you see a hotel for $1,000, you go, well, that's crazy, and so forth. So a lot of what I think we're experiencing now is this idea of anchoring bias. So the next one is got some, all these have some pretty fancy words. Again, I'm just watching the time here. Availability heuristic bias. So this just basically says we give greater credence to the information that we have. And so sort of a unfortunate but classic example of this that a lot of people talk about in the research is this idea of stranger abduction. So if any of you were parents or you had kids a number of years ago, my kids are all grown up, there was a time period there where everybody was just terrified of, you know, their kids being abducted, and there were things on a milk carton about your missing child and so forth. Well, this information was bombarding people, right? And I'm sure we can think of current examples of this. And so people started to think that this was so incredibly scary and so dangerous, and they had to be so careful about it. Well, the threats to your children, stranger abduction was like 100th on a list of 100 dangers. But we gave that, and we, again, overestimate the possibility of a similar thing happening in the future. And again, our biases can then be affected by that in the future. Bandwagon bias. So you may know this a little bit by under the name maybe groupthink, or you know, something like that. So a lot of times we don't want to be the one out. We don't want to be, you know, you hear a phrase like the fly in the ointment, or you don't want to be the one pulling the emergency brake. And so a lot of times we'll see this experience. One of the sort of, again, kind of famous and serious examples of this was the Challenger disaster for the space shuttle. And there was a bit of a bandwagon, there was a bit of groupthink, and there was a number of these biases probably came into place in that decision-making process. In retrospect, it was obvious, clearly, that they shouldn't have launched when they did. But there was a bandwagon, and there was a groupthink, and people kind of got on that bandwagon. This is also sort of the tendency of, like in elections, we'll see people choose to vote for someone because they think they're going to be the winner. So that's this one. What's the winning side? Choice supportive bias. So this is post-rationalization. In this case, they use the word post-purchase, but it's sort of any decision, you know, where you kind of bought into something or decided. And so you basically say, well, it must be the right choice because I made it. So somebody might say, well, what do you think of the current leader? You say, well, they must be better than the other leader because I voted for them. So even if they're not so great, I'm sure they're better than who we might have had as an alternative because they focus on the positive attributes. Yeah, so again, make a note mentally or otherwise which one of these you want to discuss. Choice supportive bias. Some of these are kind of a little bit like each other. Yeah, that's number 4. So yeah, so once I've done it, I'm interested in it. I'm sorry. We support what we confirm and we discount what we don't like. So choice supportive bias and confirmation bias are both pretty similar. This is where we basically, through our question, I think the best example of this is if somebody's worried about their diet, if they did a search, they would search for what is bad about sugar. So they already have a bias that sugar is bad. So their actual gathering of data is to support that, oh, you know, what is bad about sugar versus just saying, well, how does sugar affect, you know, my diet or my health? Yeah. So some people that may be familiar with the ladder of inference, this is another example of we tend to discount or put blinders on. We don't see what disagrees or would cause us consternation. So we tend to highlight and focus on those things that support our existing beliefs. I think we see a lot of that happening right now too. All right, we will go to the last little group. Ostrich bias. So I have to be very careful about this myself right now, I've noticed. And so this is where we ignore an obvious or negative situation. It obviously comes from that concept of having your, like an ostrich, you have your head in the ground and ignoring data, especially negative. The other sort of classic example is this: I'm deciding if I should go to the doctor because my tooth hurts, or the dentist, and I say the classic, this will go away by itself. This will probably go away. Let's just hope. And so that's ostrich bias. Outcome bias is an interesting one. This is where we say, well, how did it go? So rather than saying our decision-making process is good, and the next two or three are kind of, the next two are very related to this, outcome and overconfidence, things turned out fine, so we think we must be great. So the outcome was good, so our decision-making must have been good. We must be good decision makers. Whereas obviously the outcome could be based on luck. So a lot of times people say, trust your gut. Well, we trust our gut in retrospect. We say, boy, our gut was right. We hired that great person. Well, science says that managers are terrible at hiring decisions, and their gut is often wrong. So when we make a bad guess, we say, oh, I made a bad guess. When we make a good guess, we say, trust your gut. So it's a bias created by that dynamic. Overconfidence is a similar one. You're in a rising market. You pick 5 stocks. All 5 stocks do great. You go, oh, I'm the best stock picker in history. Or, I've created other products that have done well, or my other startups went well, or whatever it is you're thinking about. And so you can have excessive confidence. It can be very dangerous. And you can kind of have a personality driving your decision-making rather than some of the ideas we'll talk about in a minute. Placebo, I think most people have heard about. This is where your beliefs affect the outcome itself. There's kind of a popular book called The Secret, where you're supposed to basically think of what you want in the world, and that'll make it more likely to happen. I don't completely disagree with that feeling of having positivity, and part of resilience is having some confidence and believing in your own agency and having a self-agency. So that's good. What we want to watch out for is when we make bad decisions based on that overconfidence or that belief system, that the belief itself will do it. Survivorship bias. So this was a really interesting one that as part of this I learned about. This is the classic example. Millionaires always start their day with these 4 behaviors. What they don't do is interview everybody who starts with the 4 and see which are millionaires and which aren't. So we only look at the survivors, if you will. We look at the positive outpack. We say, oh, that's how you become a millionaire, because all millionaires do these 7 things. Or everybody, the people who lost weight did these 5 things. Well, there's a million people who did those same 5 things and didn't lose weight. Another good example of this is we could say, well, look how well they used to build buildings. We have a church here in Italy that's 1,000 years old. Well, everything else that was built 1,000 years ago is dust. But we say, oh, weren't they great craftsmen in those days? So again, or for example, in this case, they say, what are successful companies? Well, we don't analyze the companies that went bankrupt and folded. We only analyze the companies that are there, or the leaders, or whatever. So I'm going to finish up here. So selective perception, again, is our framework directs what we literally see. And so this has to do with the context that we're in. So sort of a famous example of this was about soldiers in a war. So those same people could have been walking down the street when it wasn't a war, and they would see their surroundings. Now they see hiding places. They see places of attack. Bushes are not just a bush. They're now a place that you might hide or attack from. So your perception of your environment is completely different based on the context you're in, your goals, or whatever you're trying to do. And then the final one here is blind spot bias, which is where we say, oh, I know all about biases, so I don't have any bias. We tend to see each other's, as not biased. And sort of the not me type of bias. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go to a summary so we can have all the bias on one slide for a second. And we're right on schedule. So which types of these biases have you seen? What have you experienced yourself? How are these showing up for you?
It's David. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much, David.
A great session, by the way. Look, I think for me, one of the most obvious is I think it was the last one on the first slide, the person who ignores the reality and sticks to previous beliefs. And we've got a client.
The Ostrich Bias.
We've got a client here in Australia who we've dealt with for a number of years, and he's very successful. He's in the retail sector, which of course is under extreme pressure anyway. And during this recent crisis, up until when the government issued an edict that you had to work from home, he just could not believe that his people shouldn't be in the workplace. Now, this is based on a long-held issue he's got with people not being seen to be at their workstation, which is bizarre given that he runs a business which is a listed company with probably 400 shop fronts. So he's got people throughout the country that he doesn't see every day. But anyone who works in the head office, in the key management area, he basically expects to see them at their workstation. And he still constantly walks through the building at 4:45 at night to see who's still in the place.
Right.
And which is really his most adverse behaviour. I mean, in everything else, he's extremely modern, if you like, as a manager. But in his mind, if he can't see you, you're not doing the work. And during the crisis, he allowed most other people to remote work, but he would demand that his senior executive attend a meeting at 8:30 every morning for half an hour in person. And when I tried to explain to him he was putting his most expensive and critical leadership group at the highest risk of having them in the room, he just could not see it. And I spoke to him the other day, and he's already got other key people, the designing group and others back, and he can't believe that they can't do their work without being in the room together. And other than the risk to the business and the people, more importantly, there is no doubt that after this is over, a lot of his key people are making decisions about who truly cares for them and where they wish to work into the future with new arrangements, and it won't be there.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. What do you think, David, is going to help him overcome that bias? And then, by the way, we're going to go to Dory next. Thanks for raising your hand, Dory.
Well, I don't think it's me, because I've been working with him on this for 2 years with his HRD. And he's just got this entrenched belief. And I think because he built the company from the bottom.
Yes.
And he was always on the ground there doing it. And for him, that's how you have to be a leader. You have to be there on the ground with the people around you.
Which is not crazy, right? That's not a crazy thing to think. And, as we like to say, our beliefs are formed by our experiences. So you're not going to talk him. He's going to have to experience his way.
Well, unfortunately, I think it's going to be I've already had phone calls from 2 of his key people asking me to hook them up with headhunters to find other jobs external.
Yep.
So I think it's going to be the thunder of the feet leaving, or worse still, the impact of maybe someone being dying or being seriously ill. That's going to force him to think about. Yeah.
That sounds like a really tough one. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we'll talk about in a minute is what we call objective criteria. And so sometimes that's a method. As you say, those type of strongly held beliefs may change at quite a cost. Thank you for that, David. Why don't we go to Dory, who may have a comment?
Yes, hi, can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael, for allowing me to be on this. Sue Reynolds-Frost invited me, so I appreciate participating.
Yes.
Where I see this in my practice, I'm a financial planner and wealth advisor, and there's a well-known fact of survivorship bias in kind of the investment industry where, if you look over a 20-year period, you have maybe, 25% of the funds that started 20 years ago are still in existence. But time and time again, when you have, the investor mindset, and I thought your example of like the stocks, I've picked all these stocks and they did well, so I must know how to do this, right? I see that time and time again. But just from a mutual fund landscape perspective, investors tend to say, well, I'm going to do my own investing and I'm going to pick the funds that performed well. And maybe the next year, those funds are now, no longer survive. They're kind of brushed under the rug and they're no longer in existence. So that's what we call in our industry, that survivorship bias. So that strikes a chord with me. So I hope that's a helpful example
That's
for
right
everyone.
on. Yeah, that is right on. I mean, the S&P 500, the Dow, your stock goes down enough, we throw it out of the Dow. Right? So it's only survivors by definition. The other name for this one is sometimes called the gambler's fallacy. And that, I think, probably, if you're familiar with that, if you flip a coin, the odds are 50-50. The gambler's fallacy is that eventually that has to work out to 50-50. If I flip the coin enough times, if it was heads 1,000 times in a row, eventually it'd have to be tails 1,000 times to end up 50-50. This is, of course, as you know, completely incorrect. The odds are the same every time you flip the coin.
As long as you're 51% right, I think you might have some chances there. And if anyone wants to see, or if you, Michael, would like me to share with you the research on this data, I'm happy to email it. Just let me know where I can send it for you. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. What else are we noticing in the world, if we could hear from one other person? What else are you noticing in these biases and how they show up? Yes, I think somebody's raised their hand. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's me, Michael. That's Carlin.
Please.
And I will say that the choice supportive bias, I am finding that is actually useful to have in certain circumstances, because after, and so it's after investing in something that was, going to go forward prior to the shutdowns, that isn't going to work. Sort of having this attitude of, well, we've got to make it into something, is actually helpful. So it's like a moment of, realistically, this was not a great investment because of circumstances, but my choice supportive bias is going to help me to repurpose said investment. Does that make sense?
It does. I wouldn't call it a bias, but I guess,
Okay.
Is there such a thing as a good bias? Is bias always a pejorative kind of word? Right?
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I mean, maybe
I think that's,
I'm trying to justify something, but in justifying it, I'm repurposing it.
yeah, I would call that resilience in terms of flexibility, right? So if you had said, I don't care how the world's changed, this is a great thing, we have to do it. Now you're doing what's on the list. If you say, look, I have invested, is there a way to keep investing or change, or, everybody's favorite word now, pivot. So if we can pivot, then but I appreciate, how the choice supportive, brought that up. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, right now, I think, when people talked about some of the challenges, constantly changing variables, clients aren't grounded, we don't have experience. This is kind of our back up against the wall. We're in a stress response is when we tend to be more subject to the bias. Again, also many of the clients I work with are trying to influence other people, obviously, and they feel a lack of trust. And my belief is that actually sometimes it's not I'm not trusted, it's that the other person has a bias, actually. They don't not trust me, they just have confirmation bias. So when I bring them data about their product, I had a person that I was trying to help get his startup funded, and he had some pretty big problems with his product. And everybody I showed it to that invested told me the same basic thing. I would tell him that, and he just would not hear it, type of phrase, right? So that's what we're talking about when bias gets into that zone. Any other comments on bias?
Yeah, I think this is Sue. I think that last thing you said is really important in the world of coaching. It's like the leaders that really were teed up to get coaching, it's not like they don't need support, but because of the current circumstances, this bias of protection supersedes the need that's there. So I'd like to hear you talk about that. There's no
Let me
convincing.
make sure I understand. Yeah, let me make sure I understand the question. So, yeah, say that again. I'm not sure.
Well, I guess it's I have a client right now who right before the stay-at-home order was put in place, they were teed up, and it was a long process of, these are leaders that really need help, but now we can't do it because there's this fear contraction of funds, and they just like shut it down. But the leaders still need help, and so it's a process of trying to help uncover a bias. I don't know if it's confirmation bias or if it's bandwagon bias, in a sense that, you know, every corporation is just putting the hammer down, even though there might be funds available, but they just can't pull the trigger because, and they can't see through the fact that the leaders probably need support more than ever right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'll tell you, I wish I had a great and quick answer for that entire phenomena, which is definitely happening to everybody. Let's actually, if I can, I'm going to advance again. Yeah.
Oh, Michael, this is Lytton say, oh, that kind of sounds like ostrich bias. They really want to put their heads in the sand. You know, we don't need help now. And if we pull our head up and get help, it means we must need help. And right now is not a time to be showing anybody that we need help, you know, because they're afraid that they could be at risk if they say that we need help. I'm seeing a whole lot of bandwagon bias. That if somebody's, because people don't know what to do. So if they don't know what to do, and somebody comes out and says, I think we should do this or that. Oh, okay, because they don't know.
Yes, we see a good, Soraya has a good comment in the chat, survival instinct trumps, she used that word, what they consider as unessential. Yeah, I think some of what's going on there, we could probably understand with these bias, understanding this kind of bias. I also think some of this has to do with positions versus interests and thinking about, again, kind of back to criteria. Part of effective decision-making is often what we might call a collaborative problem-solving model. So again, not a magic wand here, but what occurs to me, at least right now, is I might try to understand, okay, your position is to cut all this off. What are your interests? If we have coaches, probably have a lot of shared interests in terms of helping them, you know, maybe there's an option that could be developed, right? So there's probably a lot of assumptions about what getting coaching means right now, and they're kind of believing what that means and believing that isn't what they want right now. So that's kind of positional. So that's kind of what I think of as sort of the criteria. Is, well, why do you get coaching? And of course, this firm, our firm here, is really good at the ROI of coaching. We didn't just start doing that today. We did this for years, right, at SGI. And so to me, our underlying interest is, again, about that ROI, but like Sue and Lynn are describing, it's very difficult to get past that positional point of view. So that's bias, but I think it's also, you know, kind of context, right? The bigger, like I said earlier, the bigger the risk, as risk changes, the dynamic of decision-making has to change with it.
Yeah, Michael, it's
Does that
Kathy.
help at all?
Yeah, that helps. It's Kathy. Can I just add one point? Can you hear me?
Please, and then we'll go. Yep.
So I'm seeing a lot of blind spots, and I think that this is maybe like the ostrich as well, where people think they know what to do and they're just charging on because they don't want to lift their head up and say things have changed. how do I want to make decisions? How am I going to move on with this change? So they have blind spots because they've always focused on the things that have worked. And obviously we're in tough times. So I think that it's okay to be positive and optimistic, but you do have to be aware of your surroundings, right? So I'm seeing a lot of people that are just continuing on the same path, even though that path might not be working right now.
Yeah, and it's again a little bit what Dory and others were talking about. I'm reminded of outcome basis bias. Well, in the past, when I needed to accomplish
Right.
X, here's how I usually did it, and it worked. So even though the world has changed, I'm going to do what I used to do and assume
Right.
it'll get me what I used to get.
Correct.
And
Correct.
unfortunately, you know, yeah. So that's what I think about. So I'm actually going to go past this little question. I'm going to go here. And again, we're going to end on time. So a lot of these you may be familiar with, I think, mostly. And so I'm going to do this somewhat quickly. But again, thinking of all the bias that we just discussed, some of the problems we're talking about. So part of this is what I was thinking about in answering to some of your questions. So the idea is rational decision making, right? So sort of the opposite of a bias might be a rational basis. And so there's sort of some classic steps, and there's a lot more detail on how to do every one of these in the workshop that this webinar is based off of. So you can get, you know, the real meat there. Scope and problem root causes. So again, right now, we're under incredible pressure to go quickly. And this pressure to go quickly is exactly the opposite, unfortunately, of what we need right now. So a lot of us are like, how can I pivot? And how can I make a quick decision? And there's a lot of data that says, you know, in a downturn, the people that wait to cut costs are the ones that don't make it. And so there's all this pressure to go quickly. And so I just want to, but this rational problem solving, well, wait a minute, what is the scope of this problem? What is its root cause? What are we solving for? What is our criteria for choosing among options? And what are the other factors? What are the most important criteria? Employee safety. You know, I was thinking of David's example for this fellow. What is his criteria for deciding people should be in the office or not? You know, so then we kind of analyze the problem. We understand what we really want. Then we start to generate options. We compare those options against the criteria. And then we're able, and I think it's important to practice explaining to your stakeholders. So again, I was thinking of David's example while he talked. I was thinking of this while David was using his example. Okay, practice explaining your rationale. You know, maybe that's what he should do with his coach. He should try to explain this process and all the various steps. Well, here's the way I see it. Here's my criteria. But I think a classic example of this that I love to bring up is the movie Apollo 13. So I don't know how many people saw the movie Apollo 13. But at one point, I'll do this very quickly. At one point in Apollo 13, they realized there's some horrible accident. You may recall there's a horrible accident. And, oh, thank you. There's a horrible accident. And they realize that if they don't fix the problem on the flight, the oxygen is dropping so quickly. I mean, the dials are just moving so quickly that the astronauts will surely perish if they don't fix it. And so everybody in the Houston control room is freaking out, I believe is the technical term. And they're just going crazy what to do. They're all talking at once, they're running around. And this famous leader, I mean, this guy is actually well known. And a little tidbit about this real life guy, when I believe it was Apollo 11, where a number of astronauts died in a fire right there at before they took off. He was the flight commander, the mission commander when that happened. So he was really impacted by that experience. And you might think it would make him freak out even more. But since he's a great leader, here's what he does. He gets everybody's attention. He says, people, calm down. And then he says this in terms of decision making. He says, folks, let's work the problem. Let's not make things worse by guessing. This is my call today for all leaders. Let's work the problem, people. Let's not make it worse by guessing. Even though seconds away. And so everybody was refocused and they started to do a version of this. And you can do steps 1 through 6 here. And it could take you 2 years. It could take you 10 minutes. Depends on what the problem is and how we're doing it and who we're working on and what steps we're going to take. So I always remember him saying, let's not make it worse by guessing. I'll finish these and then other reactions or comments. Another way is to step away, is to back off. So again, we're under pressure right now. All these reasons that we talked about a minute ago. So sometimes, ironically, you want to say to everybody, you know, and we know this method. A lot of times we say, let's sleep on it. That's all we mean. Your mind will take an assignment. You can literally say to yourself, well, should I do X? And then go to sleep. And your brain will work on that. We now know this even scientifically. Another way that to get through these bias is to play devil's advocate. You sort of say, what if? What if the government told this guy that nobody can go to the office? What would he do? What if we told every single person to go to the office? What would we do? What, you know, are you going to install tattleware? Is this guy want a video camera on every person? You know, so you kind of argue, you know, the devil's point of view in this case, you know, an alternative point of view. Executive leadership decision-making, I found this to be really effective, especially when you're dealing with groupthink and some of those other bias that we talked about. You literally assign someone, and often there's somebody on your team that's kind of good at that. They're good at finding the holes and saying what might go wrong and testing and punching and pushing and poking. And so I've had executives say to me, Michael, I want better debate on my team. We're too safe, we're too nice. I want us to be more robust in our debate. And then I want us to come together and run the play that we call and be execute together. But I want a better debate because we're not as innovative as we want to be. And so they basically have a culture of decision-making that doesn't match their business strategy. And so these are all ways to sort of change the culture of decision-making for the business strategy. Coach yourself. So this is where you say to yourself, well, if I was going to advise myself, what would I say? If my mom or dad was going to advise me, what would they say? You're also probably familiar with the impact risk matrix. This is where you have the likelihood of something happening on one axis. You have the danger or impact of it happening on the other. And if it's high impact and high danger, you actually mitigate it. If it's high impact but very unlikely to happen, likeliness to happen, then you might monitor it. You'd watch it carefully, et cetera. And so there's that 2x2 that you can use. And then this idea of stakeholder-based collaboration. So having a deliberate and clear way to share that decision-making process so people know how to participate, and you create a safe environment for alternative points of view. Yeah, so I'm going to stop there and see again in chat or on verbally, you know, kind of what are your insights or takeaways? What are your thoughts about what we've discussed here? I'm going to go past all that. Yeah, I'm going to go right there.
It's David again. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. By the way, I'm going to let my colleagues run the time here, so remind me when we have to shut down. Yes, David, go ahead. Thank you.
Look, it's great and the things you're covering off. Yesterday, to Sue's comment, what we've been doing here is we've been working with all our current clients and a couple of ones that we're about to start work with. I've been doing quite a lot of work for no income over the last 6 weeks, maintaining the service provision and being there with them in these times when often the people who want the coaching don't have control of the budget for them to be coached. And in a couple of cases, we've got clients who are still putting money on the table, but quite a number of the money's been dried up because their income's been dried up by anything between 30 to 70%. So it's not just coaching that's been turned off, it's a whole lot of stuff. But yesterday I hosted a webinar for an hour and a half for a client doing a strategic review of their business, and they were in the middle of a major turnaround when this happened. And it was really interesting because the majority of that webinar was really me, and why the client asked me to do it was he specifically asked me to challenge their bias about the fact that they were doing such a great job. Because in this current crisis, their business has actually gone up, not down, because of the position they're in. And so it's a bit of serendipity. And many of industrials, many of their clients have now got clarity on major projects that are long-term, and they're making decisions now because they've got the time to do it. So a lot of these people have thought that they're rock stars because they're getting all this business coming in. They've got the longest order book they've ever had. And his concern was that they've completely missed that it's due to the environment more than to what they're doing. So the seminar yesterday was about challenging their biases around we've got it covered. We're doing well. We understand our client. And there was a half-hour discussion, and Kathy will know this bit very well. There was a half-hour discussion about what do you know about your client? And what came out was many of them didn't really know that much about their client. They were actually really going in and being given work rather than going in and selling work. So it was a very interesting type of webinar because it's the opposite of nearly every other conversation we've had in the last 8 weeks.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I appreciate, they say, the other version of the saying is nothing fails like success.
Yes.
We talked about the S&P 500 or the Dow 30 or whatever. I don't think there's any companies in there that were there 30 years ago, maybe a couple, Dow Chemical itself or somebody, but mostly and so the metaphor we sometimes use is if there's a lot of water going down the river, you don't have to be that good a navigator. Now the water has dropped. And so all those barriers and rocks and things sticking up, used to be able to buzz along, almost as you described, almost as an order taker. The phone was ringing, we had to be good at answering it and serving our client. Now, or maybe not this second, but, it sounds like you and your guys are worried about, well, what about when the water just stops flowing on its own? Will we be positioned? So it's great that you and them have the leadership and the clarity to say, let's actually think about bias. This idea of self-observation is especially tricky because we're fish in water. We can't see what we're swimming in. We have to jump out of the bowl and look down. And that sounds like what your meeting yesterday was about.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So other comments, or I'm going to describe this slide briefly, and then I think we're getting pretty close to our time limit. Any other comments?
I mean, I think this is Sue. I think the one thing I would say is that whatever industry you're in, it's just important to understand that people have biases. We're human beings. And to detect perhaps what that bias might be and find a way through listening and language to maybe not on a dime change someone's perspective, but to create an opening for them to consider.
Yeah, and this is Carlin, and I'm just going to say one thing about the book that I just posted in the chat. There's this guy who has something called the Freedom of Mind Institute. I don't know if you know this guy, Michael, but really interesting.
I know.
And it's a 4-step model for dismantling erroneous belief systems. And so really, really interesting for coaching and working with clients.
Yeah, there's also the SEEDS model, SEEDS. There's a number of really helpful models regarding overcoming bias. That's right. Yep. Let's see. Trying to think what's the sort of the best last thing to talk about. I'm going to ask the group, and again, you'll have to sort of reply somehow in text or otherwise. Who has seen this idea of VUCA, V-U-C-A? Who's seen VUCA? If you've seen VUCA or haven't, say so in the chat. Yeah, I think some of the, oh, okay, here we go. Lots of VUCA, says Len. I have. All right, so it sounds like a lot of people are already familiar with it, so I'm not sure if it helps a ton to go over it. Yeah, so it sounds like most people know about it. And again, when we think about decision making and our current environment, I mean, when I first saw VUCA, it's got to be in the 2000s. Yes, WebEx, yeah, they have a lot of presentations. I'm responding to some comments in chat. So there's a lot of great stuff about this, and so I'll kind of leave it at that if people have seen it. We're certainly experiencing volatility, rapid and unpredictable changes. And so when I first saw this, I was introduced to this by some futurists. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Institute for the Future. They are on on Sand Hill Road here in Silicon Valley, sort of a famous street there in Silicon Valley. And they're one of the few futurist consulting firms that's been around long enough that they've been around longer than their predictions. One of the things that's very funny is you have these futuristic consulting firms, they make a 10-year prediction, but then the firm is always out of business before the 10 years comes along. So they're sort of never accountable for their predictions. Whereas the Institute for the Future is still there, has been there for 30 years. They have some great folks there that I've had the honor to work with and learn from. And so I've mostly stolen this chart from them, but it comes from a number of places. And yeah, Carlin, I appreciate your comments. So again, volatility years to vision. So where are we going anyway, and why is it worthwhile? Uncertainty, again, has to do with something, people have mentioned a lot of uncertainty. So we still, have to work the problem and not make things worse by guessing. So understanding means, what can we understand? I think, David, as you described your meeting yesterday, people are realizing, well, in this uncertainty, maybe we need a new understanding of our customer. Maybe we need a new understanding of our competitors. Maybe you need a new understanding of the value we really provide. Complexity, again, has to do with unintended outcomes. So we change something on one side and it impacts something else. We've seen a lot of examples of this. The homeless, trying to improve the homeless situation. We try to fix something and then it makes something worse somewhere else. Trying to improve schools. We see a lot of examples where people generally agree on the outcome, but the complexity. So clarity on our values, for example, again, a safe employee. And then ambiguity is when you get opposing trends at the very same time. So I think one example of this is working from home. And so on the one hand, people kind of go, well, this is neat. I'm free. I don't have those hours of commute. Therefore, it's probably more environmentally friendly. I can see my family better. So I'm more free. At the same time, working from home now means that people have tattleware on their software. And this is where the employer is watching you every second, and any window that's open, and they've got a video camera on you and all this stuff. And so you get opposing input, and then that yields to agility, which is where we are able to flex and know what's important and be able to do smaller changes that we can then evaluate versus kind of the old waterfall style of planning something for a really long time and then producing it is not going to work as well in this case. So thanks for letting me go through the VUCA and so forth. And I think we're kind of getting towards the end here. So is there any other kind of questions or comments that anybody would like to make? That would be great. I don't know if we got a chance to hear from Angela or anybody still left on the call. Jeff, any other comments or questions?
I'll just say thank you so much, Michael. It's great to have you and to hear your wisdom, and hope we get to hear more of it. I think, really fascinating content, and it's really appreciated.
Thanks. No, it's really my pleasure. And as you can see, these are really passionate topics for me, and I think they're really important. I will just try to respond. Lynn, thank you. I wonder how Solidarity University is handling this pandemic. I am not actually familiar with that university. So I'm sorry, Lynn, I can't help on that one. I don't know if anybody.
Michael,
okay. They're another futuristic. They're a futurist group. All right, thank you for that. Yeah, Joseph or anybody.
I just wanted to pop in and say, it really does feel like we could go on for another hour. It feels like we're just getting started. Where can people reach out to you if they are interested in finding you and continuing the conversation?
Of course, that would be awesome. So it's michael@michaelpapanek.com. I don't know if there's some little follow-up we could send to people, or I can certainly type it in the chat here. And obviously, I'm very happy as a Sloan consultant here, and so you can look at me on the Sloan website, and of course I have my own website, and there's a blog there. where I talk about a lot of the same issues and such. So yeah, thank you. Carlin Sloan's got it there. Michael, exactly. That's the way to get hold of any of that. Will get hold of me. So thanks again, and thanks to everybody who came, and maybe we'll do this again, and we'll let you know again, and it'll be a slightly different conversation every time. So thanks again for everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
people
Michael.
coming today.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Be
All
safe.
right, everybody stay well.
Bye-bye.